This is an ad. It's me, Phil. Every now and then, someone reaches out to us with a book or an event that they're wondering if we can promote to our listeners. We only do it if we like the thing we're promoting, and this is one of those cases. You've heard David Fitch and Scott McKnight on the podcast before. They both teach at Northern Seminary here in the Chicago area. Northern Seminary has an initiative called the Grow Center for Church and Mission, and the Grow Center is putting on an online conference next week in honor of Martin Luther King Jr., January 18th through the 22nd, each evening at 8 p.m. Central Time. It's a historic event with a different speaker each night, looking at Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech through the lens of the scripture that runs throughout. Seriously, it sounds really cool. I grew up in a white Christian bubble, and I didn't even notice it until I was well into adulthood and realized, oh wait, not all Christians are white. Hey, white guys and gals, we need to burst our bubbles and let our non-white Christian brothers and sisters teach us a few things. The event is called Remembering Dr. King, Out of a Mountain of Despair, a Stone of Hope. It's kind of a long name. If they'd asked me, I would have come up with something shorter. But what are you going to do? A different speaker each night unpacking a different part of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, January 18th through the 22nd, each night at 8 p.m. Central Time. So go to thegrowcenter.com/events. That's thegrowcenter.com/events. If you miss the details, just rewind the darn podcast and listen to the ad again, okay? Pop your white bubble and learn some stuff. Thank you for listening. Now, the show. Hey there, this is Phil. Welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I am here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, Phil, how are you?
Hi, you weren't expecting to go first.
I certainly was not. I was just hanging out.
Stunned. And Sky Jitani.
Hi.
Hi, Sky. And we got Jason on the controls. Hi, Jason.
Hey there.
And special guest for this episode, Caitlin Chess is back. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi.
Hi, good to have you here. How are you?
I'm making it.
Great start to 2021.
Fake it till you make it. Yeah, I promised, someone already pointed out that I promised that 2021 was going to be completely all better, on I think our last podcast of 2020.
What's the word?
And you didn't believe me, Christian. You didn't believe me when I said that 2021 was going to be all better.
I think
you 21 were being sarcastic.
21 turned to 20 and said, "Hold my beer and watch this."
Yeah, there was a little of that. All right, here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. Okay, I have assembled this group of esteemed thinkers to find out what last week was an interesting week in American history where we saw a rally with a lot of Christian music and Christian flags and Jesus Saves banners turn into an assault on the U.S. Capitol that successfully breached the Capitol for the first time since the War of 1812 and killed 5 people and sent Congress into hiding. When was the last time that happened? When was the last time Congress had to go into hiding? Maybe 9/11, I imagine. I don't know, has it happened since 9/11? Yeah. So, but usually not because of a buffalo-headed man and guys carrying Christian flags.
Probably not.
By the way, Caitlin, does your church have a Christian flag in it on the platform? Because mine did in Muscatine, Iowa. There was a U.S. flag and a Christian flag.
No Christian flag in the sanctuary, but we have a school attached to us, and they do pledge allegiance to the American flag and the Christian flag.
And the Christian flag, yeah. I did.
Who made the Christian flag? Like, why is that the Christian flag? Who made that decision?
Jason, you need to research that. That's your job for the next 5 minutes.
I Googled this recently, and it's pretty old. It was like 1800s that this guy made it. But then they rewrote the pledge sometime after him to make it a little more PC or something like that.
Hey, but in church history, 1800 is not very old.
No.
In church history, no, but it's an American thing. There's
that's
no...
what I want to know.
Yeah, because we wanted to put the American flag in our churches, but if that was the only one, then it seemed a little,
Yeah.
is that shady? So we need a Christian one to show that we have dual allegiance, not just the wrong allegiance.
Right next to each other, same kind of
Same
thing.
level, same height.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So it was 1897 unofficially, 1942 officially adopted, and it was designed by Charles C. Overton and Ralph Eugene Diffendorfer.
Wait, the Christian flag was made by Diffendorfer?
I think that's how you say it.
That's a Simpsons character.
It's not exactly a complicated graphic design.
No,
it's beauty. Beauty is in its simplicity.
And just dawned on me, wouldn't the Crusades flag have counted as the Christian flag before that?
Yeah, well, that's a whole. Let's not go there. Okay. We got
enough heresies to deal with today.
Let's start with Christian. What did you think last week as you watched events unfold?
It was very strange. I went downstairs to make a sandwich, and I never, ever watch news or television. And I just felt this turn on the TV. So I was like, okay. So I went to turn on the TV, and there it was before my eyes, people, climbing up the walls of the Capitol, which emotionally first for me was very unsettling because I worked there for 10 years and I walked those halls, and all of a sudden I saw Jesus Saves banners and crosses. And so I was very disturbed, and really, usually I do not prolifically tweet on Twitter, but I made an exception that day, and I was really asking people to pray with me because I was so disturbed and upset.
Yeah. Caitlin, where were you? Did you kind of watch it live, and what did you do?
Yeah, I had seen like a few things on Twitter, and I wasn't actually sure at first how serious it was. Like, because we talked about earlier, like I was expecting something like, some protests maybe turning, more violent. But then once I started really like paying attention to the minute by minute what was happening, I was really disturbed. I'd never worked near there, but I grew up. A lot of my time growing up was outside of DC. And so just knowing how much federal buildings matter and how usually how good their security is, that was really like surprising to me. And just feeling like really heartbroken over, no one ever wants to feel like I told you so. And it's like the worst feeling ever to be like, the rhetoric actually does have really serious implications. And also feeling really heartbroken that like, what could possibly convince people that we have this alternate religion flourishing in our churches? If this is not clear enough for you, then I don't know how to convince you. And that was really heartbreaking too, to just be like, how do we have conversations with each other about how to move forward from this? If some people saw that and didn't see it as awful of a problem as it clearly seemed to me.
Right. Yeah. If that doesn't convince you that we need to seriously self-examine, well, you have to come up with a whole different narrative, and
which apparently
we saw
they
people
did
come up with in about an hour, and that was all it took. Sky, how was your experience of watching the weirdest history we've ever seen?
I compared it to the feelings I had on 9/11, and it's one of those things where you're riveted, you're stuck to the television screen because you're watching something that you never believed would ever happen. And I wasn't at all surprised by the protests. I wasn't surprised that they stormed the Capitol, really. What shocked me was how easily they actually infiltrated the building. That's when I stood up and like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe this is happening, and that they're evacuating members of Congress, and there's a horned Viking on the dais of the Senate. And, it's like it was surreal. It was crazy. And my dad and my brother we were all kind of texting each other about what was going on. And somebody sent the picture of that guy on the dais with the horns and the fur coat and the whole thing. And I tweeted this. I thought this is the photograph that is going to be in my grandchildren's history textbook about the decline of American democracy. And my brother responded by saying, I don't know, he looks like a pretty benevolent overlord. Maybe we should give him a chance. But like that's what it was. It was this bizarre mix of sadness and lunacy
Satire.
and satire. Yeah, like this is like a Saturday Night Live
Yeah.
skit gone
Yeah,
on
it
steroids.
was like if Monty Python took over the government, and then you stop laughing and realize they actually did.
Right.
Wait, it's not a bit.
And then later, when you find out not only were people killed in this mess, but then within hours you had political leaders justifying this behavior or spinning it into some kind of new conspiracy theory that it was really Antifa or whatever. You're like, oh my gosh, nothing is ever going to break this fever. That was probably the most disheartening part of the whole thing. It wasn't that it happened; it's that the spin to justify it was already occurring within minutes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my primary conduit into the world of hard right MAGA is Eric Metaxas's Twitter feed. And so I was monitoring that pretty closely, and he went silent for about 12 hours. So there was 12 hours of introspection and recalibration, or opportunity for recalibration. And then when he came back to life, it was Antifa. It was, and then today, oh my gosh, today he's saying that anyone who accuses, Trump supporters of violence is just like Hitler during World War II, creating false narratives to demonize people. So we're all the way back to and of course, unfortunately, the muting of the president by social media platforms gave, the MAGA far right just, now we got something to be mad about. And this is all we're going to talk about. So I was kind of flipping back and forth between CNN and Fox News, just say, how's the narrative evolving? And very quickly, primetime Fox News, the narrative evolved into, can you believe Jack Dorsey at Twitter has enough power that he can censor the president of the United States? So it was stunning. They're like, well, can we just go back to what happened yesterday? Can we just maybe go back to what happened yesterday? Okay, Sky, you wrote a piece.
I did.
It's up on theholypost.com. You can go check it out. Called the title is America Has Seen Political Violence Before. Here's why the MAGA attack is more dangerous. You want to unpack that for us, Sky?
Sure. The core issue I was trying to raise, and the only reason I wrote it is because I hadn't seen anyone else really talking about this, is I watched a bunch of historians on the news over last Wednesday and then days following, trying to put what happened in some kind of historical context. And of course, they bring up political violence from the 60s and 70s, or of course, the Civil War always comes up. And the argument that you often hear, and I get it because it's calming and reassuring, is America's been through worse. We will get through this as well. The difference is prior attacks, even 9/11, were rooted in some kind of fact. So, for example, the 9/11 terrorists, as evil as that act was, they were motivated by the fact that there were U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. They said this in their fatwa, and they thought that was a desecration of that holy site for Islam, and that's what motivated them to attack the U.S. There really were U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia. Or even the Civil War. Those southern states seceded when Lincoln won the election of 1860 because they understood that Lincoln would not allow for the expansion of slavery, and it put all of slavery into a threat. And they realized that, and they decided it's time to secede. Again, the Confederacy, rooted in white supremacy and slavery, is demonstrably evil. But what provoked their retreat from the Union was the fact that Abraham Lincoln was opposed to slavery. There's no denying that. What's different in this case is you had thousands of Americans attack their own government for a lie. There was no fraud in the 2020 election, certainly not at the scale that would change the outcome. And yet they believed that. And that's what's so kind of terrifying about this moment is you saw thousands and thousands of Americans resort to violence against their own country for something that has no basis in reality. And I think that means we have entered a completely new dimension, an unprecedented act of political violence that we have no equivalence of in American history. None.
Right, and you can draw a line, which you mentioned in the article. You can kind of draw a frightening line between the one guy raiding the pizza parlor in Washington D.C. to free the children that had been locked in the basement by Hillary Clinton, but weren't, and this,
Yeah, I think it's the exact same thing, just on a far higher magnitude.
yeah.
And where does it go from here is the
I don't
problem.
really want to think about that. Can we make sure that no international despot who actually has nuclear weapons has access to Facebook? Can we can we do that? Is that a thing that we can do?
Yeah, I mean, we've joked about this over the years on the podcast, but this is why I hate Facebook. And it's not only Facebook, obviously. Any social media can be abused, but Facebook currently, I think, is probably the worst offender. It is toxic to a civil society.
Yeah. The did you see this, Caitlin? The president of Midwest Baptist Theological Seminary tweeted why this was different. Why this attack was different than like the violence of the summer. And one of his points was because it was incited by the president. That's just like a whole new thing. And I posted that because I thought that was, I was happy about one of these, the gang of six that told us that CRT was the biggest threat to the church in human history, willing to say, oh, this was really bad too, and here's why it was bad, and linking it back to the actions and words of the president. I reposted that on Twitter, and the general response was, oh, that's a really good point. Then I reposted it on Facebook, and within 180 seconds, people were up in arms at such a suggestion as that. So the difference in response, and then I said later on Twitter, when I post things on Twitter, sometimes people say, I'm not sure I agree with you, Phil. When I post things on Facebook, within 60 seconds, people are throwing furniture. Mm-hmm. And I don't quite understand that. So I've really had to change when I look at a thought or an idea. Is this for Twitter? Is this for Twitter and Facebook? Is it a puppy? Safe for Facebook?
Like Twitter is like Meet the Press or Crossfire on CNN, and Facebook is like Jerry Springer. It's a different order of program.
Yeah, it made me concerned because there were, I had someone, I'm very quickly, and I don't even know if these people are in my audience, arguing that no, the most reliable source of news we have today is Q, and willing to go toe to toe, post after post with anyone who disagreed that Q wasn't the most reliable source of news we have. So, Caitlin, got any ideas? What do we help?
One of the things that has really just blown my mind, especially in the aftermath after the 6th, about Q stuff, because there were people I knew on my Facebook saying it was really Antifa and it was, all manner of conspiracy theories. And often what would happen is people would say like, well, it's kind of like how you believe in systemic racism. And I think that's, false. I also believe this. And you think I'm crazy for thinking this. And it was like Christians and sometimes Christian leaders equating the protests, equating believing in systemic racism and believing in Q. And the craziest part about it to me was I was just like, we're the ones, at least the churches I grew up in, that said we believe in objective truth, that some things are true and some things are false. And yes, sin has clouded our ability to make perfect judgments about that. And there's bias in the media and there's all sorts of things make it difficult to discern that. But it was really people acting like, well, Q is my truth and systemic racism and whatever is your truth. And over here, we think this, and this is the same as it. And it just blew my mind to see Christians acting like everything's all kind of the same and we can all kind of believe what we want to believe. And honestly, I mean, I don't think that talking about Q or talking about politics in general should be the primary thing you talk about at your church all the time. But it has really disappointed me to not see more pastors think of this as an important thing, to be like, not that sometimes it takes more relationship and conversation than just getting up in a pulpit and saying Q is wrong. And here, you're not going to probably win people over that way. But not seeing that as, in this particular moment, a really important spiritual issue for you to be dealing with, because it's not just, do they believe Q or not? One of the consequences are they going to end up storming the Capitol at some point? But two, have they just lost a sense that truth is real and absolute and discernible in a often wrong way and broken way, but still in some level, by God's grace, discernible to us we can figure it out, and it's there and real. Like, you're going to lose, when someone comes to your church and has all sorts of questions about, the truthfulness of scripture, and they've read all these conspiracy theories about how scripture came about to be, or conspiracy theories about who Jesus was and his wife and whatever. How are you going to possibly be like, no, some things are true and some things are false, if you let them get away believing in Q for all that time?
One of the most disturbing things this year for my brother and I were both trying to engage people gently on Facebook that were relatives, even distant relatives, just to redirect them towards reliable sources. And my brother jumped in when someone on a post, just said something that was obviously blatantly false and easy to disprove, and gave them a fact-checking story on it. Said, here's a fact-checking story. One of their friends immediately responded with the scariest statement I've heard this year, which was, fact-checking is fake news. How would you even respond to that? I fact-checked that, and the fact-check of your statement that fact-checking is fake turned out to be false. Well, you can't. It's completely...
Yeah.
You are so far down the rabbit hole at that point. You should be looking for a tea party.
Christian, what do you think?
I think that I will tell you what I've been thinking. I've been praying a lot about this. I have been reading my Bible, and I feel like we really need to be corporately lamenting and praying in a corporate sense for our community. Because if we look back, I don't really understand why we're so shocked necessarily. If you look back at the human condition, there were bad pastors all the way back to the scribes and the Pharisees, right? This is not new news. There are constantly bad leaders, and there are constant divisions between people about, the law and about what people believe is truth. And people have been warring over that for centuries. And really, the only time that the church begins to grow is under intense stuff like this. And I really do think that,
You mean grow in numbers and in the elaborateness of our buildings and programs?
that is not what I mean. I mean, people really seeking relationship with Christ and relationship with one another and the truth. At the ultimate end of the day, Christ is the truth. And that is what is undisputable. At least that's what we believe if we are followers of Christ. And, I think that's what's so difficult for us here on the podcast. And anybody that writes us on Twitter often says, you guys have been an oasis for me in this craziness. And I think the reason is we are calling people back to who Christ is and what his truth is. And I don't think we should be shocked at what's happening now. And there isn't anything that we can do to make people see the ultimate truth. It really is going to be the Holy Spirit, pulling the scales from their eyes or opening their ears or changing their hearts. And that's what we need to be praying about.
Right.
Sorry, you asked me what I thought.
No, I want it. Bring it. Bring it, girl. Bring it. I've got 3 responses from 3 different evangelicals. They're all white evangelical males, which is, the power core of evangelicalism. And I'm looking for what are the voices inside that power core saying. And so these are interesting. Michael Gerson is a Wheaton College grad who was a speechwriter for George Bush and is now Washington Post.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's an evangelical Christian. He says, Trump's evangelicals were complicit in the desecration of our democracy. The desecration of democracy was under the banner, Jesus saves. And then he predicts that the coming weeks will see a gradually arriving reckoning. This is a word that's been popping up a lot. I don't know if you've heard this word, this reckoning word. Political leaders who sought access and influence over the past 4 years through a political alliance with insurrectionists and domestic terrorists are responsible for unleashing insurrectionists and domestic terrorists. It is true above all of Trump's evangelicals who sought to recover lost social influence through the cynical embrace of corrupt power. And he's trying to find a way forward for evangelicals, who've been so sullied by a drive for access to power. And what does it look like? And can we come back to the commitments of Christ? Okay. Anyone strongly agree, disagree with his view there?
It's hard to disagree.
Yeah.
But when you talk about evangelicalism, this didn't begin in 2016. This has been brewing for decades. And I have the echo of Dallas Willard in my head saying your system is perfectly designed to produce the results you are experiencing. So we need to do more than just look at what's happened in the last couple of years. We have to look at what is inherently true about white evangelicalism that has led to this point. And, until we deal with that, we're never going to get beyond this.
I mean, I'm going to tell you, I'm 54 years old. I'll say it right now. And I was born steeped in this stew of Christian nationalism from 1966, to now. So it is not a new thing. It has been going on for quite a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Ed Stetzer. Ed Stetzer, our friend, been on the show a few times. He's a dean at Wheaton College, and he's the director of the Billy Graham Center. He wrote a piece called Evangelicals Face a Reckoning. A reckoning, everybody. It's a reckoning. Donald Trump and the future of our faith. Now, many evangelicals are seeing President Donald Trump for who he is, but more need to see what he has done to us. Most evangelicals, me included, he says, are grateful for the Supreme Court justices he appointed and for some of the religious liberty concerns he addressed. His anti-abortion stance surprised many, including me, says Ed, and for that I was thankful. But most of that is in jeopardy now because Trump is who many of us warned other evangelicals that he was. Yet of greater concern for me is the trail of destruction he has left within the evangelical movement. Tempted by power and trapped within a culture war theology, too many evangelicals tied their fate to a man who embodied neither their faith nor their vision of political character.
That's a big assumption.
What's a big assumption?
That he doesn't share their faith or their political vision.
Oh,
I'm saying that maybe they share his.
Oh. What? He has no faith. What faith?
That's my point. Like what he ultimately has faith in is. This isn't a critique of Donald Trump. It's a critique of the people who are following him. Ed is making the assumption that they are true followers of Christ and have made evangelical theology the bedrock of their lives. And I would humbly submit that the evidence points to something else.
Okay. Yeah, I posted this on Facebook and Twitter, and it led to a couple of interesting conversations because the first line in his piece, and this was in USA Today, he wrote, was, "No one likes to admit they were fooled. It's tough to admit we were wrong." And a few people pushed back and said, "How could you honestly have been fooled? I don't even think he was trying to fool you.
Right.
He was who he was, and he was." And my response was, yeah, but there were a lot of Christian leaders that jumped in, like James Dobson, who jumped in and said, "I met with him, and he's a baby Christian. He's just a little baby Christian, so he doesn't have it all figured out yet, but he's turned from his bad ways of his past, and there'll be no more porn stars. He's on the straight and narrow from here on out." And people believed that because they wanted to,
right.
Even though there was zero evidence to support that claim. I pinned it more on leaders deceiving
That's
people.
True, too. But this is John Fia's point in his book, who was on last week. Believe me, because his argument was evangelicals didn't vote for Trump despite his negative character and behavior and rhetoric, but because of it. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't that they were fooled. It wasn't that they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. It's that they liked what they saw. And that's an indictment on the state of American evangelicalism, not that people are stupid.
Yeah. So Ralph Reed took over the mantle of Jerry Falwell Sr. in politically active conservative Christians and runs the Faith and Freedom Coalition today. Michael Gerson, quoted Ralph Reed saying, "There has never been anyone who has defended us and who has fought for us who we have loved more than Donald J. Trump. No one." So that's going way past we're holding our nose and voting for a deplorable character to saying we've never had a president we've loved more. That's a frightening thing to say. And
Listen
then,
to what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just, I mean, that echoes what Matt Getz says, which is Donald Trump remains the inspirational leader of a loving and patriotic movement of people who needs to stand and fight together.
Oh, in love.
In love.
The loving, fighting patriots. Penny Nance of Concerned Women for America is quoted by Michael Gerson saying, "We didn't vote for him to be our pastor or our husband. We voted for him to be our bodyguard."
I heard that a million times.
Yeah, and Michael Gerson says this, which I think is profound. But what if the bodyguard you hired turns out to be a brutish, bigoted, narcissistic, authoritarian thug who wants to burn down any democratic institution he can't control? Perhaps the moral character of political bodyguards actually matters. Perhaps evangelicals should not be hiring bodyguards in the first place, but rather supporting moral leaders who seek the common good. Caitlin, do you have a perspective on that? I see that hand.
Yeah, I mean, the bodyguard analogy is so telling, right? Like, we need to be protected,
We're not
and we need to be pragmatic in our seeking of protection. Like, it doesn't matter, bodyguard imply, like, you don't care who your bodyguard is in other ways. You just care that they're big enough to push you away.
We're all Whitney Houston, and we need what's his name,
Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner, to pick us up, and that's Donald Trump.
I don't really know what you're talking about, but
it's a movie called Bodyguard. It's a movie called The Bodyguard, where Kevin Costner is Whitney Houston's bodyguard. It was, yeah. You were just a tiny little idea thinking about the liturgy of politics in wherever souls come from in the Pixar movie.
But I will say too, I mean, I think, Sky, you're right to be like, we don't get to act like we were fooled. Like, no one was like, but on the other hand, like, sin is deceptive, and we were self-deceived in the sense that over time, like you said, there was a lot of alignment with Trump and evangelicals in terms of the things that mattered patriotically, security-wise, like, all of the kind of macho, I'm going to take on the world and whatever. But we got that way by being deceived about what is really good and true in the world. And we got that way so slowly. Like, I think the thing that frightens me for like young evangelicals like my age is looking at what's happening and going, I could never get there. That could never be me. I could never be either storming the Capitol or posting the crazy QAnon stuff on. That could never be me. Instead of realizing that people made little tiny concessions, decisions, turned small ways, stayed silent about small things for decades, and ended up in a place they didn't mean to be. And I worry that people my age, because they want to be in that position of authority or power to say the truth, like, they're like, I need to be the head of the National, Evangelical Association. I need to be the pastor of the church. But to get there, I have to stay silent about things that matter, or I have to make compromises, or I have to do little things. But then once I'm in that position of power that they were in, I'll handle it better than they did. Once I'm in the Oval Office, I'll actually tell the truth to the president. It's like, by the time you got to the Oval Office, made all the decisions you made along the way to get there, you're not going to be practiced enough in courage to actually do those things, or in integrity or honesty. And I worry that this is such a big example of evil that people my age will go, that'll never be me. I could never do that.
Caitlin, that's a really insightful point. But I think what you're diagnosing is the universal seduction of power.
Yeah.
Right? That's the core problem, is too many evangelicals just want power. And they don't realize that the way of the cross is the surrender of power. And there's an assumption that, like you said, if I have the power, I'll use it righteously. I'll do the right thing with it. But that in and of itself needs to be called out. Yeah. And we're just not doing that. And yeah, this is a bizarre moment in our history, but I think it's far larger than Donald Trump. And here's my question, though, for all these Christian leaders out there, like Dobson and others you've mentioned, Phil, who justified support for Donald Trump, let's have mounds and mounds of grace and say they didn't know, they didn't realize, they were self-deceived, or they whatever. What are they saying now? Following this moment, are they willing to say, I'm done with this guy, or he should resign, or we need to repent of this, or we need to call out the untruths, or I'm not hearing Christian leaders saying that who were strong supporters of Donald Trump. Maybe I'm missing it. I've been in a barrel here, but
yeah. Did you read the interview with Al Mohler?
No.
Who's running for president of the SBC? Extensive interview where basically they were trying to pin him down on this, and he just said, "Look, if I knew now, if I'd known then what I'd know now, maybe I would have done something differently, but I couldn't have known. I couldn't have known now than what I know now. So I would have voted for him again.
But today he's not supporting him. Say that?
Today, he didn't say that explicitly. He still wants to run the SBC.
I know. This is what's driving me nuts, is there's just no courage.
Yeah.
And I've said this so many times, but these leaders, all of us, I'm putting myself in this category too, like all of us who have any level of influence have to fear Christ more than we fear our audiences.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. Caitlin, you're not a Southern Baptist, but surely you know a lot.
I do.
Okay.
Meaning she knows a lot of Southern Baptists.
Yes. And knows a lot of...
You're not a Southern Baptist, but you still know a lot.
No, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
That's not what I meant. Russell Moore came out strongly and said he needs to get out of office. This man needs to get out of office. Is that going to cost him again? Is he going to, because the last time he took a stand, he had to fight for his job in the SBC. Is it going to cost him again, or is it now? Is it a bad look to try to get someone fired at this point after a riot? Is it a bad look to try to get someone fired for supporting a political leader that caused a riot?
I think people are going to try. I mean, I remember the first go around how intense that was. Not personally, like I don't know. I'm sure it was overwhelming for him, but from the outside, it looked just ruthless. Yeah. And so I'm sure it will be hard this time around. I will say I have been reticent to call certain things courageous or what, some of the people in the cabinet leaving where it's like, okay, well, you waited until the last minute. There's been certain expressions of this that haven't really required a lot of bravery.
One paycheck left. That's what you gave up. One half of one paycheck.
But for him, it's like, the cost and you're willing to risk it anyway. I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah. Did you guys see the reports? I was watching Meet the Press on Sunday, and there was some reporting that one of the reasons why cabinet members were not willing to pursue the 25th Amendment, and one of the reasons why over 100 Republicans in the House of Representatives still voted to object to the certification of Biden's win, was because they were actually afraid for themselves and their families.
Yeah, I saw that.
That the physical violence, the threat of physical violence, is keeping Donald Trump in office.
Yeah, well, when you find out there actually was a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan because of her opposition to the president, it's like, okay, this has crossed a line. Do you know what I blame this on? Do you know what I blame all of this on?
Video games?
No, Ted Turner.
Oh,
do you know why?
Yes.
Because Ted Turner decided it would be a good idea to have 24-hour cable news networks. That there was and everyone said, there's not enough news. There's not enough news, Ted. There's not enough. We need a half an hour at 6 and a half an hour at 10. That's all we need. And he said, no, I think there's enough news. So he launched CNN, and we just started focusing on the same stories over and over again at deeper levels, and it actually worked. And more people started becoming political news junkies. And then someone said, wow, that's making a lot of money, but it feels a little lefty to me. Let's do something that's righty. And then we get Fox News, and now we have competing revenue streams that are based entirely out of getting people to look at politics the same way they look at football. And they talk the same. You can flip back and forth between CNN or Fox News and ESPN morning shows, and people are yelling like the world is about to end, whether it's because of Tom Brady or whether it's because of Donald Trump. It's the exact same tone of, this is the biggest thing that ever happened. And it took people off the couches and into war over politics who never were that engaged before. And to keep them engaged, you need to keep it exciting and to keep your ratings up. And that's the video I made in 2016 about Donald Trump and whether Doritos gave us Donald Trump because we got bored of boring flavors and we wanted everything to be extreme. So we wanted our politics to be extreme. And so if Fox not extreme enough for you, try Newsmax, try OAN. Is MSNBC not extreme enough for you? Try whatever is way over there. I don't even know what is way over there. Because then you just turn into communists and you go live on a commune or a kibbutz. So I don't know it became entertainment. It became entertainment. And we have to make politics boring again. That's my mission. Make MPBA.
I think Joe Biden's well on the way of.
I know, that's why he's what we need for the next 4 years is something so geriatric that it makes politics actually look like C-SPAN again instead of Newsmax, and people say, I'm just going to go watch football. We need half America to just go back to watching football and not watching politics because it made them crazy.
Even politics has become football now. Right?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, look at what the NFL's gone through in the last couple of years with the kneeling, and now we have the BLM stuff. So even that's become politicized. It's everywhere.
You're destroying my hope. Okay, Christian, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, that is like one easy extreme, but I think the positive thing about all of this is that it has forced us to look deeper at many different things. Our politics, our faith, our relationships with one another. And that is not a bad thing. In fact, I was talking with Hunter today. We were going over today's Daily Stoic. And in that, the Stoics talked about how there is nothing intrinsically good or bad in itself. It is how we relate or respond to it or think about it. And that's what we have right now is a moment to think about all of these different things that are happening, events that are happening, ideas that are happening, and we can sit and discuss them and say, is this who we want to believe? Is this who we want to be? Is this how we want to relate to each other? And, yes, I think it's easier to go back to simple ways, but we're not there. The genie's out of the bottle. And so now we have to be thankful for this current moment. And we ask the Lord, what can we learn? Who are we going to be?
I just think everyone needs to be required to. The only news you can watch is 1/2 hour of Fareed Zakaria on Sunday morning.
We're allowed that.
He is really boring.
That's because he's mostly facts. Did you know that?
Smart.
He's mostly facts.
Right. He's boring, but he's smart. And he just says this is, and he has an outsider perspective on America because he grew up in India. He says, this is what I'm observing, and I'm a little worried about this. Let's talk to an expert.
Phil, you're getting dangerously close to an Indian accent there.
I wasn't even going there, Sky. You heard that in your own head because you said, but that's my job. I want to do that. Let me do my Indian accent, everyone. It'll be fun. And then Caitlin said, I've got a great Asian I'd like to jump in on. And then Jason said, this is where I get off the podcast. And Christian said, I'm not allowed to do those anymore when I do auditions for voiceover jobs because it's not politically correct. So, okay, we got to go to David French. Speaking of international flair, let's go to David French from Tennessee. He's actually from Kentucky. He wrote a piece that was the longest of all these pieces.
He is very verbose, I have to say.
He is not short of word.
No.
And it also has one of the most intriguing headlines to grab you. So it was just, he knows how to play this game. He's winning. Only the church can truly defeat a Christian insurrection. So that made people mad right there. Like, wait a minute. Everybody knows this was Antifa, not Christians. He says, why do I say this was a Christian insurrection? Because so very many of the protesters told us they were Christian as loudly and clearly as they could. There was a giant wooden cross outside the Capitol. Jesus saves signs and other Christian signs were sprinkled through the crowd. I watched a man carry a Christian flag into an evacuated legislative chamber. I could go on and on. He has a colleague who was present at the riot from the Dispatch. She told me that Christian music was blaring from the loudspeakers late in the afternoon of the takeover. And don't forget, this attack occurred days after the so-called Jericho March, an event explicitly filled with Christian nationalist rhetoric so unhinged that I warned on December 13th that it embodied a form of fanaticism that can lead to deadly violence. So, are we willing to go on record and say this was a Christian insurrection? I mean, there were also white supremacists in there, and there were just, some total nut jobs in there. But the heavy Christian overtone on everything has got to be at the very least deeply concerning.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a Christian insurrection, but I would say Christianity has been bundled together into this ugly package.
it was Christian adjacent or it was Christian themed?
Both.
Um, I don't think there's anything that's authentically Christian about what's happened, but I do think they have hijacked Christian imagery, language, even
What about his
tradition.
What about his next argument? Are you still not convinced it's fair to call this a Christian insurrection? I would bet that most of my readers would instantly label the exact same event Islamic terrorism if Islamic symbols filled the crowd, if Islamic music played in the loudspeakers, and if members of the crowd shouted Allahu Akbar as they charged the Capitol. Would you have
For sure.
any? Yeah. I mean, heck yeah. Just the pictures of the crowd facing off with the Capitol Police. If you darkened the skin of those protesters, gave any of them headscarves, turbans, anything that feels foreign, we're immediately freaking the heck out, even if every
Yes.
one of them is a native-born American.
Yes, that's true. But if I could speak on behalf of some Muslim neighbors, friends, and others, it would represent a perversion of Islam rather than its accurate teachings, which is why I would say what we saw is a perversion of Christianity rather than a genuine expression of the faith.
I hear you. I hear you. If a riot isn't justified, and now he talks about the summer and the comparisons that people are making to the summer and the Black Lives Matter riots. If a riot isn't justified when agents of the state actually kill innocent black men and women, it really isn't justified when you falsely believe wild election conspiracy theories or when you falsely believe a cabal of cannibal pedophiles controls Washington. Marching for a lie is bad enough. Rioting for a lie is an atrocity.
Yeah, this was kind of the point of my article.
Yeah,
same thing.
It's just insane that everyone has believed a lie. So then, and this is where it gets interesting, he talks about, says too many Christians are in the grips of two sets of lies. We'll call them the enabling lies and the activating lies. The enabling lie is the lie that makes you fertile ground for the activating lie that actually motivates a person to charge a thin blue line at the Capitol or take a rifle to a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. Now, here's an enabling lie. And I've heard this so many times. America will end if Trump loses. How many times have you heard that?
Billions.
Yeah, he says that was the core of Eric Metaxas's argument in our debates this spring and fall. Here's another enabling lie. The fate of the church is at stake if Joe Biden wins. I've heard that in YouTube videos and Facebook videos from late night preachers, and here is another one. The left hates you, sometimes concluding with the phrase, and wants you dead.
Mm-hmm.
So these enabling lies have rocketed through the church for years. They share important characteristics. They not only dramatically exaggerate the stakes of our political and legal disputes, they dramatically exaggerate the perfidy of your opponents, the evilness of your opponents. Moreover, when the stakes are deemed to be that high, the end of the America or the end of Christianity, the moral limitations on your response start to fall away. There you go. So, abortion debate. When the higher the stakes, the more you find yourself unlimited by moral constraint in opposing, in getting what you want. Okay. Caitlin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I feel like I've heard those things so many times. And it's another, like I said earlier, it's another one of those things where I wish people in positions of spiritual authority in particular felt like it was part of what they are called to do to say that's not true, instead of kind of redirecting or like awkwardly sort of, because I've seen that so many times. A pastor to his face will be told something of that caliber of the world will end, the country will end if Trump isn't president, or the left hates us or whatever, and they just kind of move around it. And I think last week is evidence to us that there are real consequences to doing that. And then I think if you haven't done that in the past, then you have an added responsibility now to not, you don't have to say this was a Christian insurrection, but you do have to repent of your community's involvement in it because you feel some level of responsibility for the larger community that you're a part of. The world has seen us defend ourselves way more than repent of the sins that we have either directly or indirectly been involved in. And it's supposed to be the opposite of that. And so I would just like to see less Christians, I would definitely like to see less Christians defending those actions, but I would even like to see less Christians defending, hey, not all Christians are like that. That's not like my church. That's not like my pastor. I would rather you repent and not be defensive. But then your defensiveness is your faithful living in your community, to where when someone says, hey, someone had a Jesus Saves, poster at that thing, but the community church, like the one down my road, they're not like that. Like that can't be the same thing as them. Instead of you being so quick to be like, that's not us, like live a life that makes that clear to people that that's not you.
Right. Are you familiar with the no true Scotsman fallacy?
I've heard you say it before too.
Yeah, the no true Scotsman fallacy is if you say no Scotsman would ever do that, and then someone says, "Oh, look, there's a Scotsman doing that." You say, "Well, that's not a true Scotsman."
Impossible.
If he was a true Scotsman, he would be doing it. There has been so much no true Scotsman on the internet in the last week. The no true patriot does that. No true Trump supporter does that. So it must be Antifa. No true Christian, and I've gotten this on my Facebook page a gazillion times in the last 48 hours of those people aren't true Christians. And like, what? How do you know? Well, I mean,
so
they're obviously.
Like we're supposed to be the first ones to be like, we are capable of such evil. Like we are broken and sinful. And like, we're supposed to be the first one. We have the most reason of anyone to say that we're capable of those things, and that even redeemed believers are capable of those. We have all the Bible stories, but like when it comes to this, we don't do that.
But we've become tribal. And if we acknowledge bad about our tribe, we lose on the scoreboard of tribes. We go down and we can't stomach that.
Do you remember in 2008 during the presidential campaign, there was a video that got a lot of attention where John McCain was at a town hall rally, and some woman stood up and started going off about how Barack Obama was a Muslim and a terrorist and wanted to destroy America or something like that. And McCain interrupted her and said,
shut her down
and said, no. And he said, Barack Obama, I disagree with him on many things. I don't want him to be president, something like that, but he's a good man. And what you're saying is not true. That kind of courage and dignity on the part of McCain is what we are lacking today, not just from political leaders, but from church leaders, as Caitlin was saying. Too many, when they're faced with this mountain of lies that are coming at them all the time, just decide to avoid it. They don't address it. They just remain silent. They let it lie there. And this is where it's gotten us. And
are you capable as a Christian of saying that atheist is displaying wonderful ethics?
I don't understand why that's difficult. I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus called it out. Jesus called it out in a Roman centurion and said, I've seen no greater faith from anyone in Israel than this Roman. I mean, that was scandalous for him to say that. And then the parable of the Good Samaritan, making the Samaritan the hero of the story while the Levite and the priest are the bad guys. Like, he did this all the time just to find the tribal identities of his culture, to call out what is good, true, and beautiful, even in somebody who has the wrong label. And yet we can't bring ourselves to do it.
Right. David French says, as I said in a December 4th newsletter warning about potential violence, if you argue that the very existence of the country is at stake, don't be surprised if people start to act as if the very existence of the country is at stake. Don't say these things if you lack the imagination to see where they can go. I mean, it was stunning. That's why I reached out to Eric Metaxas on November 30th. I sent him I responded to one of his tweets saying something outrageous just because I was skimming the responses from his followers, and I saw some of his followers saying things like, I'm going out to buy ammo, and other followers saying, I'm waiting for further instructions. And I reached out to him and said, Eric, tone down the rhetoric. You've got people talking about buying ammo. You're going to get someone killed. And that was on November 30th. He instead hosted the Jericho March rally and introduced a militia leader who talked about, we'll give them a little more time to solve this politically, but just a little more time. This is frightening what we get into when we decide everything is at stake, when if you are a follower of Jesus and you've already picked up your cross and died to yourself, nothing is at stake. Nothing is at stake because you've already died and you are inside Christ. So I don't know how we can offset this nonsense that we have to sacrifice ethics and morality to preserve our national identity?
One of the pieces that I found most disturbing, and I tried to highlight this in the piece I wrote, was like, go back to the Confederacy. And the leaders of the Confederacy genuinely believed in the righteousness of their cause. They absolutely believed in slavery. They believed in white supremacy, and they were willing to die for those evil beliefs, just like the Nazis genuinely believed in their craziness as well. What's so weird is Donald Trump and a number of other leaders, they don't believe what they're saying. They don't believe the election was stolen. Donald Trump said, I'm going to march with you to the Capitol. He just turned around and went right back to the White House. The Republicans in the Senate who were talking about how the election was stolen and we need to decertify the electoral, they dropped if they genuinely believe that this country was being stolen, if they really believe the election was fraudulent, where are they? They don't believe it, yet they've inflamed all of these thousands of people to believe it who are going to face the consequences like Christian mentioned. And they're not going to be the ones holding the bag. And that's it's so cynical. It is so cynical. And I grieve for the multitudes of people that you see in some of these crowds, because they are, like Jesus said, sheep without a shepherd. They have been led really, really badly, and their leaders are making boatloads of money off of them. And they're the ones who are going to be left hurting, broken, and destroyed by these lies.
Right. Okay, wrapping up David French. He says, rebutting enabling lies does not mean whitewashing the opposition. Saying, I don't care about abortion, or I don't care about these other issues that are important to me as a Christian, religious liberty. It does not mean surrendering your values or failing to resist destructive ideas. It does mean discerning the difference between a problem and a crisis. Between an aberration means just somebody on the other side doing something crazy, and an example of what that whole other side represents. And it means possessing the humility to admit when you're wrong. The other day I said that I felt that flood geology of the young earth creationist movement originated from the visions of Ellen White, the founder of the Seventh-day Adventists. And I was wrong. It actually preceded that in some circles of geology in the 17th century and 18th century. And someone pointed that out. And I said, thank you. I've learned a lot. And then I did a podcast that corrected it and made it the right way. It's okay to be wrong. I was wrong about Ellen White. I mean, it was kind of right, but also mostly wrong. Okay. And we can all do that. I was a little bit right, but mostly wrong. We can all do that. It's okay. It doesn't make me bad. It makes me smarter. Okay. And it means possessing, I already read that. And it means possessing the humility to admit that, I was wrong about reading that again. It means understanding that no emergency is ever too great to stop loving your enemies and blessing those who persecute you. And now this is interesting, and the rebuttal has to come from within. The New York Times isn't going to break this fever. Vox won't change many right-wing minds, but courageous Christians who love Christ and his church have a chance.
Amen.
Do you agree?
Preach it, brother.
So what do we do? Start with you, Christian, or start with you, Caitlin. Caitlin, how do we combat the enabling lies of, America is at stake, the church is at stake, our children are at stake? Someone just tweeted me after one of my tweets yesterday and said, well, what are you going to say when conservative Christians start losing their children? And I just replied to him and said, to what? Rock and roll? I mean, what's the thing that's going to come and take our children? And he never, help me out here, fella. Is it the child snatcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? What's coming down the pike that I don't know about?
It's critical race.
She doesn't know that reference either, by the way. She probably does not know that reference. Bang. I knew it. By the way, it's all-time great. Go watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Scare the crap out of you. I still have nightmares about the child snatcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Oh, man. Caitlin, how do we combat the enabling lies of us versus them, and everything is at stake every time? What do you have any ideas?
I mean, it's kind of like what he said. It's going to take people in individual personal relationships, people in their churches, people in community groups, people in families. I mean, I know so many people at the seminary now who have been in months-long conversations with their family members, and they will move tiny little inches at a time. And I really do think that even if you don't see the results of fixing that, if you are faithful to try and do that, God will honor that. And And I've even seen in my own life, I recently paid for trying to say the truth to a group of people that didn't want to hear it, paid a cost. And yet, as I paid that cost, the people who watched that happen, I have seen them respond in really incredible ways where they went, I watched someone sacrifice for the truth, and yet it has inspired me to try and be as faithful as I can. And I think the world would look at what happened and see, you failed. Like you tried to say the truth and people didn't want to listen and you had to pay a cost for it. If Russell Moore gets fired from the ERLC, people will be like, see, failure. He shouldn't have said that. Instead, I think we're not going to see for decades the people who watched those people make those decisions, who listened to a pastor that got up, on a Sunday morning and told the truth about things, to a family member who risked some relationships but tried to be as compassionate but also truthful as they could. We're going to see those sacrifices and see that there were really positive, implications that we couldn't see in the moment. People who watched that and were emboldened to be faithful in their own spheres. And honestly, more important than all of that, we will honor God by trying to be faithful. So I try and I know that we have to ask that question of like, how do we move forward? How do we fix things? But I've kind of gotten to a place where I go, we all try and be as faithful as we can in the sphere we're in. And if nothing seems apparent, on the surface to be fixed from it, if our churches dwindle in size, if our institutions crumble, like there are some things that might need to die. And we might not even see, positive implications for what we've done. But I think from God's perspective in the long term, there will be that, and we will have pleased him with our faithfulness, and that will be enough.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Sky.
First
Give
of
me
all,
something.
I love what Caitlin just said, so I don't want to repeat it. I want to come up with something totally different.
Yes. Involving your dog and...
I have given this about 30 seconds of thought, so bear with me. I think we need a completely different system to determine people's influence on social media. And here's what I'm thinking. I think there should be some kind of rating system where the size of your audience is limited to the faithfulness with which you have wielded the audience you already have.
As judged by Jack Dorsey?
By me, of course.
By Sky.
Yeah. So here's what I mean. Like, let's say you are Donald Trump and you have tens of millions of followers because you're the president of the United States. Every time he puts up a tweet which is demonstrably false, or an incitation of violence or so, whatever, like they say, okay, we're cutting off 5 million of your audience. Right. Like
this is happening. Oh, now this is happening.
I know. But here's the biblical reason for it. It's Paul, when he talks about who's qualified to be a leader, says, find people who are not new in the faith and who have been proven to be faithful with what they have. Look at what they have influence over. Are they faithful with it? Then give them more. And Jesus has parables about this. But the whole idea that anybody can amass any amount of influence doing whatever they want, I think is just toxic to our society. And so we have to come up with ways of rewarding truth, rewarding positive influence, rather than just rewarding spectacle, which is what social media currently does. And I am not saying I have the answer, but if we continue down this road of simply giving people influence because they create spectacle, regardless of truth or consequences, we are going to be destroying ourselves and eroding the foundations of a free society.
You realize the setup for this was, and the rebuttal has to come from within.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
And your response was, Jack Dorsey is going to give Sky Jatani control of Twitter.
Yeah. Okay. But see, when I have the power, I will use it benevolently and in a Christ-like way.
It's almost like we just talked about
exactly.
this.
Everyone hold in your mind what Caitlin said as we go on to Christian, and just forget about... Christian,
actually, yes,
what are your thoughts? Take us home, dear.
I do really love what Caitlin said. I also think Sky's idea is interesting, and I want to challenge him to spend a little bit more than 30 seconds coming up with
brilliant.
That.
Come on.
I saw those air quotes.
No, because actually there is something interesting in that, to challenge people to find leaders who, for something other than spectacle, even if you just grab onto that, that is who we're looking to all over the place. So that's one idea. But I have two suggestions. And the first one, Phil, you actually did in the very beginning. And that is ask questions. When you are in a conversation with someone who says, the world is going to end if Joe Biden is elected, the question would be, well, why do you feel so strongly about that? What do you mean it's going to end? Exactly how does that look? Or what are you afraid of? What are you putting your fear in? And if they're Christians, we really need to ask them to contemplate that. Because I think people don't stop. They're so into this routine of believing this. You can't argue with them. So cause them to stop and think by asking them a question that they actually have to think about. That's number one. And number two, I really do think ultimately, like I said in the beginning in my little soapbox, we have to pray. As a people of Christians, we have to pray, and we have to call our brothers and sisters together to lament the church, the big C church that's happening right now. And we need to ask for the Holy Spirit to come and cause revival in our church and to really rise up people that really love him and follow him.
Right,
I'm sorry, it's not funny, but
No, I hear you. Don't be fooled by funny. Sometimes funny comes from people that are flat out wrong. I appreciate that, Christian. I had somebody tweet at me. I was on Twitter a lot over the last 4
you
days.
sure
more than
were.
I know.
I
It
wanted
was
to go, Phil, stand down. You're going to come on the podcast on Monday and you're going to complain about all this hoopla on Twitter. You brought it on yourself. And the thing was, you even did it again with Eric Metaxas. And I was like, gosh, are you a glutton for punishment? You had somebody on Twitter say to you, stop it. You two, stop it. He equated you with Eric Metaxas like you were equals, like equally fighting. Just Phil.
so
Come
as I
on.
was saying,
You're
somebody
on Twitter a lot.
yes, somebody reached out and said, I'm this close to leaving the church. I don't think I can hold on because of all this nonsense. And my response to them was, hold on, friend, we can make it better. Because I really do think we can. Because all it takes is a remnant of any crisis within the church. It was always a remnant that said, I think we're off base. Let's pull together. Just those of us that can agree that we're off base, even if we don't agree exactly in what way or exactly what the solution is. Obviously, Sky's solution is ridiculous, so that's not it. But between Caitlin and Christian, I think we have a shot.
Just more evidence that we need more women leaders.
Yes, thank
Amen.
you for that site
Thank
tag
you.
or
Guy.
lesson. So hang on, everybody. We can make it better. I honestly think we can make it better. And you guys are making it better by supporting us at the Holy Post Podcast and all the stuff that we're hoping to be able to do to create community for the spiritually homeless and the politically confused. And everyone is saying, is this what it looks like to follow Jesus? I just don't have a good feeling about gallows in front of the Capitol building. We're here for you and we can relate. Okay. Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, Sky, for being here. And guys, have a great week and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.